Thank you for being here. Hopefully more people will show up and fill in the room. We have 34 RSVPs and the room holds 30. The purpose of today's MCLE is because, we have fabulous speakers and honorees. I wanted them to be able to speak to you a little bit more about their story rather than the 10 minutes they're going to have at the podium. These are both fascinating people. I've known both of them for decades. Beth and I have been friends for over 2 decades. Abby came and spoke to my law school at Vanderbilt back in 1988, and I was
a child.
I was so inspired by her. I can remember everything about what she said, the room, everything. And I think you'll equally be inspired by her today, as well as Beth's story. I mean, Beth, as an actress, stopped acting to start the second only AIDS delivery organization in the country, and she's going to tell you all about that. And then Matt Fujizaki is on our board, on the Pride Bar board, one of our founding members. He's also an attorney with ICLS in the county's legal services and in charge of the pro bono. So if any of you ever want to volunteer and be on pro bono, he's the guy to talk to. If you want to do it with San Bernardino, we also have Chris Marin over here from San Bernardino as well. Matt is going to be your moderator, and they are going to have some pre-prepared questions that they're going to answer. And then at the end, we have about 10 minutes for Q&A. So if you have any questions, any whatever, and it's also a time afterwards to get a photo with them. So we have this little step and repeat. And then afterwards, we invite you all to our ballroom at 5 o'clock, or a little thereafter, for cocktails and social hour. So I'll turn it over to Matt, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dean, for this introduction and all of your work for this evening. It's exciting to be part of this amazing evening, and we are the formal kickoff for the inaugural Pride Bar Gala 2026. Before we get started to the panelists, and I promise I'm going to keep my speaking to a minimum. I don't know if you've looked at your written materials, but the resumes and stories of both of these wonderful people are inspiring, and they're amazing, and they're worthy of being CLE credit, which is great, but also being reviewed and studied. And I took a look at them, and I really want to highlight and give opportunity for you both to tell the stories. Before we get in, I did want to say 2 things. As someone who is overseeing the development of an HIV legal services program, now in 2025 we got funding and we're launching that. It is truly an honor to have read about the work that you've done and to just envision during that time how important it is, or it was then, and it still is now, and it's really set the foundation for all the work that we can do as a legal aid organization in a region that has one of the largest LGBTQ populations and populations of people living with HIV. Without all of the work that you did to kind of get us through those really hard times, and while it's unfortunate there's still work to be done, but we're able to do that because of you, so thank you. And on a bit of a lighter note, as someone who went to BU Law, and we talked about this, but I swear it was in my remarks before that, and I was reading your bio, and you founded the LGBTQ program, or the LGBTQ affinity group and social group there. I actually met my husband at an LGBTQ affinity group event, so it wasn't for your work.
Wow.
He would not be there today, which I don't know if it's good or not, but it's just how it is. But anyway, truly thank you for paving the way at law school, and of course, as you'll get into, for marriage equality, which is also important related to him. So I'm going to get started on the panel now. We're going to start with you, Abby.
Okay.
Can you please tell us a bit about your background, your early life, your early career, and what kind of inspired you to be a lawyer? And we'll stop there, and then you'll talk more about being a lawyer a little later.
Okay. Well, thank you all for inviting me. I was born in upstate New York, and we moved to Florida when I was 7. My parents are Reformed Jewish, but way on the Reform side. Like, I don't know anything about the religion except I have a really Jewish name. When they come to get the Jews, it's, I'll be right there with them because of my name. But my family wasn't very religious, but any of you who are Jewish know that it's kind of a social thing, and the way you're brought up and the social values, and also being aware of discrimination and people being treated unfairly was always kind of baked into me. When When we first moved to Florida in 1961, it was when integration was kind of just starting. When I first moved to Florida, this is how recent all this stuff is, there were still signs up that said colored only for white only for drinking fountains. The buses, black people had to sit in the back. When my older brother and I, we were little kids, we wanted to go in the back of the bus because that's the cool spot. And the driver would tell us, no, you're not supposed to. I mean, that was 1961. That's my lifetime. That's not that long ago. And when we drove to Florida to move there, we, as a family, voted. I mean, it sounds kind of hokey, but we weren't going to stop at any places that discriminated. They had to be integrated, or we wouldn't go to them. And so that's kind of the family that I grew up in. And then, I went to segregated schools until I was in high school, and then there were race riots because they did integration backwards. They did it at high school level first, so the kids we'd all been separated. And when I was in high school, the Vietnam War, I grew up in all those eras. So social justice and fighting for social justice was always something really important to me. Like, my parents let me go to Washington to marches against the Vietnam War, when I was a teenager. So I was in a consciousness raising group, the statesman, you maybe know about that, but consciousness raising, like about feminism when I was 17. It was older women, grown up women and us, but, consciousness raising, that's what it was called like that. But so when I went to college and law school, it was kind of, and when I finally realized I was gay, which, believe it or not, it took me a long time. When I finally came out to my dad, he was like, I always knew. And I was like, why didn't you tell me? I struggled for so many years. Plus my mom told me, don't tell your dad. I was like, okay. And then after a few years, she's like, you have to tell your dad. I was like, okay. But that was my background. So fighting, when I realized I was gay, it was kind of a natural thing to just fight for justice there too. And that's kind of when I started the law school group. It wasn't just me, there were a number of us. But back in those days, there were still lawsuits those were the days of lawsuits to make state universities recognize LGBT groups, which we didn't even use LGBT back in those days, of course. So, that's the rest of the question.
I think that's kind of your early career, what kind of inspired you to be a lawyer?
I always wanted to be a lawyer, and I always wanted to be an actor. We were a year apart, and it's kind of cool that we both achieved what we always wanted, and we both had a fair amount of success at what we did, so that was kind of nice. We also have a younger brother that kind of estranged from, but he didn't have goals like we did. But I was inspired by people like Barbara Jordan, civil rights leaders, lawyers that really spoke up. To see, and I'm going to talk some about that tonight with the awards thing, but the power of lawyers to make change. I believed in that, and I still believe in that. I think it's really important. But that was inspiring to me.
I think so. I think it's important to think about, especially back then during the fights that you helped lead, which we'll get into later now. But especially today with what's going on, standing up and leading and fighting for inequities is unfortunately still.
Well, really, my younger daughter's pregnant right now, and she has to have all these fears about going to visit her mom in Tennessee because it's a red state. And what if she needs medical care for her pregnancy? It's just really scary that we have to worry about stuff like that, huh?
Absolutely. Beth, we of course know you from the screens, both as a famous television and movie actress. And can you please tell a similar question as Abby, how you got started both in the business, but also kind of more particularly what got you started motivated to advocate for LGBTQ folks and people living with HIV?
Well, I always knew I wanted to be an actor. I was the kid, and every kid's like, please don't call on me and make me read it. I'd be like, I'd love to read this passage. Fantastic in this history book.
I remember those two things. I was not one, but I appreciate other people took that role.
So there was that was always a huge part of who I was. And a writer. I was always an avid writer. But I was also, from a very early age, even in high school, I was 15 years old, I was a senior in high school. So I had been my parents were maniacs, okay, so, and that's true. So when I turned 13, I was like in high school already, and they go, sad news, you're 12. And I go, what do you mean I'm 12? And they go, we lied, we faked a birth certificate. You're so impossible to fucking deal with that no preschool would take you, so we just lied and put you in kindergarten. And I was like, I'm only a sophomore and I'm 12? And they were like, sorry, super bad news. I was like, so I'm never gonna drive a car? Never? Like, it's just like, I'm just gonna be sitting here at 12 in high school? And they were like, yeah, that's how that's gonna go. So I was, I was very young, but I was also very passionate. I was part of the junior chapter of the National Organization for Women in high school. I started licking stamps and sealing envelopes for the Mobilization for Survival, which was an anti-nuclear group back then. So I was in high school in the early 70s, so I graduated in 75, so this would be 72, 73. And I protested with the teachers when they went on strike and brought them donuts, I mean, like, I was always that person. I think because I grew up in a rather violent and crazy household, my instinct to protect is fierce. So, if I couldn't protect myself, I had to protect the other kids, so I've gone through life being that person who's like, not that good at protecting myself, but do not fuck with this guy sitting next to me, because I will go to the mat before I'll let you hurt him. And so that's just how I evolved as a human. And I went to the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. I knew I wanted to be a professional actor, and I got to New York, and I had a spectacular career getting fired from restaurants. And then I started reading about this thing called gay men's cancer, and it was really worrisome. And I'm going to speak about it a little later on, but I read that this state senator put a bill forth to quarantine all gay men. And I thought, I better go down there. I just thought, if they're gonna try to, what are they gonna get, nets? Like, what are they gonna try to round up all the gay men in New York City?
I always said they should give us Hawaii.
Right?
Give us Hawaii.
I was like, what on earth? So I went down, and I signed up and I gave them my name, and the next day I got a call from the guy who would become my partner. And I just stepped into this world that was so desperate and so desperately in need of my help. They wouldn't allow gay men to go before a grant board. The gay men who tried to petition for donations were kicked out. Get out, fuck out, don't bring that AIDS in here. It wasn't AIDS, it was called gay men's cancer then. And then they were like, we don't want that, your kind in here. Like, it was really dangerous for anybody to advocate for people with this cancer. And it wasn't dangerous for me. As a woman, as a straight woman, I could do what they couldn't do. And I had no idea that I would give up my career for aspirations for 5 years. I didn't wake up one day and think, hey, I think I'm gonna go, run an AIDS program for 5 years of my life. It's just, I was standing there, and we started with 13 people, and then it became 50, and then it became 100, and then it went from a crisis to an epidemic to a pandemic while I was standing there. Like, the wind of it just blew me back, and I couldn't stop. There was no way that I could walk away. So I quit acting for quite some time. And they were terrible days. There were terrible times, and it brought out the worst in most people, but there were a lot of good people too. And here we are. If you had told me then, in 1984, that gay marriage would be legal, that a black professor from Harvard would be elected to the presidency twice, I would have said that you were completely insane. So that's kind of how I got.
And instead, we now have an insane president.
Yeah, I know. I know, go figure. And I almost feel like, you know, the pandemic was I had a lot of PTSD during the pandemic because the same sort of idiocy prevailed in so many circles and so many aspects of our society. And it really brought back for me, you know, the fear and the prejudice and the blatant stupidity of people when they are afraid. People when they are afraid are not at their best. And, you know, I mean, not everybody was a bleach drinking fool, but a lot of people decided to draw lines in the sand and say, you're my enemy because you wear a mask, or you're my enemy because you got this, or and so a lot of that was very reminiscent for me of what happened during the AIDS crisis.
I think we all appreciate you sharing. It is a moment that I learned about as a kid and was really hard as a child. I think that was the framework when I was in elementary school and younger. That created so much fear for being a gay kid. And that was kind of my perspective, but I've heard your story from a few other people who were in the front lines helping. And I just think it's so powerful, you saying that what you could do and the privilege you had is not being a gay male during that time.
Right.
And stepping away from something that was your passion since you were 12/13, then 12. Or
Yeah, 13 and 12.
is amazing. I do have a follow-up question, part because I'm just curious. How was that experience? And I know, I'm sure in many ways, but when you went back to acting, I imagine it played a role in that maybe. In some ways it might have been hard to turn away your dream of acting, but maybe there was something that you took from it in acting in the rest of your life. I'm just curious about
Well, I think I was forever changed by it. So a lot of actors, they live in the mirror. They how do I look? Is my hair perfect? They are so obsessed with themselves and how people see them. And I had spent a life looking at real situations and real people and real problems and trying to solve them. So when I had an audition, I was like, oh, scary, you're a casting director. Like, what the fuck do I care? I've been helping people die for years. I was like, I'm not scared. Like, let's just get on with this. It doesn't mean there weren't disappointments and, but I came to it from such a different place. And when I got to LA, because all my work was done in New York, when I got to LA, somehow my reputation preceded me. And, people would call me in, casting directors would call me in and close the door and say, I don't know what to do. Can you help me? Can you tell me what to tell my children? I think my husband might be gay. People still needed my counsel in that area. So I've never just been an actor. I'm an actor and I'm a social service delivery person and I'm a political activist. And all three are huge parts of my identity. And I think honestly, if I had to give one up, I could let go of actor easier.
Thank you. Talking about different parts of identity, we're going to talk about your involvement in marriage equality. And I can imagine being a person who's impacted by the decision, also an attorney who's inspired to be an attorney in part, as you shared, because of injustice. How was that for you as being part of history? How did you get involved in that decision or in that litigation? And how did that all come to fruition?
Sure. First of all, I'm really honored to have had that opportunity because not many people get to go to the Supreme Court in their career, and especially not on a, life-changing constitutional huge case like that. And some of it was just timing and luck that our case went to the Supreme Court. You can't control that, but like when I was in law school, like marriage or even never would have occurred to me. Even when I was at Lambda in the 80s, I left Lambda in 1988, and I hired Evan Wilson. He had been my law clerk one summer, and he came as a staff attorney, and Evan Wilson's like the father of marriage equality, because he made it be a national issue, because it was so important to him. And even when other people wouldn't, the rest of us, me included, were like, no, we're not ready for that, it can't happen, blah, blah, blah. But he really pushed it, and it kind of took off. I mean, it was an example or a lesson, and you gotta listen to the people. Our organizations can't just determine for people like, this is what we should do, that's what we should do. You gotta listen to the people. And people out there in the country, all over the country, not just in the big cities on the coasts, in the interior, people wanted marriage. Like, that made all the difference in the world. And my personal involvement happened because after the Windsor decision that kind of started the dominoes falling, our local paper covered that. And of course, after that decision, a lot of the talking heads were saying, well, this is the roadmap, the next step's gotta be, full marriage equality, and this is set. So there weren't that many out gay attorneys back then. In fact, I was probably the only one. But so they called me. At a point, I was the only one in all of Tennessee and maybe a lot of the Southeast. But so the newspaper called me to ask about that, and then the reporter said, well, so is there going to be a challenge in Tennessee? And I was like, well, what am I going to say? I said, hell yes. And so then that was in the newspaper and online the next day. I had no plaintiffs, no team. I'm a solo practitioner, so I wasn't going to be challenging marriage equality. But then a lawyer called me from Knoxville that she had read about it. She was at the University of Tennessee Law School. She called me and said, I want to be part of the team. And I said, okay, you and I are the team. And then we got another woman just who was on her own from Memphis. So Tennessee has 3 grand divisions. That's what they call it, how the state's divided. So we had somebody from each grand division, which we wanted. And then we needed a big firm. I got a national organization pretty easily because I was very involved with the National Center for Lesbian Rights in San Francisco. I did a lot of cases with them. And I called Shannon Mittner there saying like, hey, we can't just do these challenges in the easy states. We got to do them in the South. And he was, yes, of course. And they were in from the beginning. And then they'd get a big firm. And the first guy I called to was a fellow Princeton alum and friend. He was a really big firm, and he was big in the Tennessee Bar Association, this and that. And he was really excited. He wanted to do it, but then one of his law partners didn't want them involved in a gay case. So they couldn't. He said, it's a partnership. I gotta honor that. So we were disappointed when I was talking to my friend, my new colleague in Knoxville. She had her law student, a law student that helped her was at her house with her boyfriend. Well, we were having this conversation, well, what are we going to do now? Like, who are we going to get? Who's liberal and at a big firm? And the boyfriend kept saying, my dad will do it, my dad will do it. And we were like, kind of like, shut up. But then finally, we said, like, who's your dad? And he said Bill Harbison, who was like the incoming president of the Tennessee Bar Association. His father had been the Chief Justice of the Tennessee Supreme Court. He was like as establishment as you could get. And we're like, really? And then he called him and asked him right over there, and he was like, sure. So then we had our big firm, and to their credit, they're kind of a conservative firm, but they were all very respectful, and they said the only question they had was how to limit how many attorneys at the firm could work on it, which is a really, I think that speaks highly of our profession, which a lot of the time, we can't speak highly of our profession, but there are times like that when, people really step up and do the right thing. And so then we had to find plaintiffs and blah, 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 and probably take it too long, but we made a choice. At the point we did our case, the dominoes had started falling, and there had been like 50, there were a ton of decisions on our side. And we decided to offer, and most of the challenges were outright challenges to say we need marriage equality. So we decided, as Southern conservative kind of lawyers, not really conservative, but we decided that we would structure our case to give the Supremes an opportunity to take just like a baby step in case they weren't ready. And we thought the next baby step after Windsor, which Windsor was, you have to recognize marriages from other countries. So we thought the next step would be if somebody gets married in a legal state like California or New York, or the few that were at that point, and then they moved to Tennessee, Tennessee should have to recognize that valid marriage. They don't, we're not gonna make them give marriage licenses, but they gotta recognize those. So that was our approach. We tried to do that. And then we lined up plaintiffs who were people that had moved there. We had a military couple, a guy when he came back from Afghanistan, he got transferred to Memphis. So when he was on the base in Memphis, he was married. If he or his husband stepped off the base or put their toe over the line, they were no longer married. So they were kind of perfect. And plus he had fought for our country and risked his life. And then we had another couple that was a guy was a paralegal at a big San Francisco law firm that moved, probably to save money and rip people off because we're not a union state and stuff, but they moved a bunch of their people to Nashville. And so he and his husband and their kids and then the grandma all moved together. So they were like a little family with kids and blah, blah, blah. And then the last couple from Knoxville was a lesbian couple, and they were both professors at the School of Veterinary Medicine. That's kind of a stereotype too, isn't it? And they were like specialist veterinarians. One of them was an obstetrician. We have a picture of her delivering like white tiger cubs. And the other one was a cardiologist for animals. Like, they're so cool. And then they were pregnant. So that became the key to our case. They were pregnant right then, and the baby was due in March. And we filed our case in like September. But I can't remember which year, 2013 maybe. And so we filed for a preliminary injunction to prevent Tennessee from keeping the non-bio mom off the birth certificate. We want them both on the birth certificate. And we fortunately drew the most progressive, great judge. It was just like a God thing. It was one of those things where I'd be like, thank you, Jesus, even though I'm Jewish. It was so exciting that we got her, because we knew she'd be fair. And so then we filed for this injunction, and then she sat on it. She kept not ruling. And it was like February, the baby was due. So we did something that those of you who litigate know you like never do. We filed a motion asking for the status of the case to try to like nudge her. And she sent us back her ruling a couple of days later, and that was 2 paragraphs, 1 sentence in each paragraph. The first paragraph said, the plaintiffs have filed a motion asking about the status of the case. And then a new paragraph that said, the status of the case is that the judge is working on it. It's kind of I need to find that in like
The judge is working on it.
It's like the court is working. I think it said the court is working on it. But she knew what she was doing, and someday I'm going to ask her to confirm this. I haven't yet. But like a few days before the baby was due, or the day before, she issued a ruling giving us the injunction, and the baby was born, and Regina in Knoxville was right there ready to get went and got the birth certificate. Like, before the state could file for a stay, of course, she denied the stay, and then they had to ask the Sixth Circuit, but it was too late by then. They issued a stay, but it was too late. We already had the birth certificate, so it was pretty cool. And because we had gotten the preliminary injunction, then we were in line. Like, all 4 states in the Sixth Circuit were in kind of, Michigan had done a whole trial and won. Ohio, I don't remember if they had done summary judgment. Kentucky also, I think, had summary judgment. We had a preliminary injunction, so we were all on appeal to the Sixth Circuit, and they combined all the cases, and we did one oral argument. I called it Gay Day at the Sixth Circuit. Like dog sniffing dogs and stuff. It was really intense. And of course,
all the game things, or no, that was just a separate.
I think they were worried that there'd be protests or stuff against us.
Yeah.
I think that's what they were worried about, or maybe, I don't know, maybe they were trying to sniff out AIDS, because everyone was who knows? We didn't care, we were just excited to be there. And of course we lost, which was devastating to us because we had won in the trial court, but everybody else in the country, every other lawyer was like, yay, because you remember, like RBG had said, we can't take a case until there's a split in the circuits, and there was no split. So when we lost, I had to write my friends like at NC Law, and I'm like, could people be a little sorry that we lost? But anyways, it was a good thing, because then we did cert petitions, and we didn't know which they would take, and of course they took them all, and then
I'm sorry, I could talk for hours.
No.
It's quite the experience.
You will have to update us, or at least me, when you hear from that judge. I'm so
I know.
curious if
I know
if
she
they
did.
did that.
I
Yeah.
know she did it on
Because it was really smart, because then
Because
they
they
got the birth certificate,
Yeah.
and guess what? The world didn't fall apart.
Exactly.
And showing that they'll do that.
She knew it would happen.
We'll come back in a bit, because I do want to bring Beth back in. I know we talked a little bit about the work that you did in the 80s with people living with HIV. But your next question is very specifically about the foundation and the organization that you formed. How did you get involved? I guess that's the question. How did you get involved in that? And I know you talked a bit, but why? And how has it shaped other advocacy work that you've done since then?
I met my partner, Peter Avitable. He called me and he goes, "Are you really a woman?" And I go, "Yeah." And he goes, "Are you really a woman? I need a woman so bad." And I was like, well, "Yeah, I'm a woman. How can I help you?" And he was like, "Hi." He was very, very hyper guy. And he was like, "Hi, I'm doing a dinner." So he was doing a dinner at St. John's Episcopal for these guys with the cancer, and he needed volunteers. So I went down to serve, and nothing could prepare you for what that was like. And at the end of it, which I'll talk about in my speech later, you guys are gonna go to that, right? At the end of it, Peter threw himself on the ground and said, "I need your help. I really, really need your help." And I was like, okay. And so I met him Tuesday at St. Peter's Lutheran, and he explained what we were gonna do. We were gonna do a sit-down dinner with china and silverware. We were gonna do it every Tuesday for people that had this disease, for people that were sick, because isolation was a terrible problem. If you had a Kaposi's lesion on your face, you didn't leave the house. You were terrified. They couldn't call their parents. They couldn't tell their father. They didn't know what to do. And so we really wanted to try to break that isolation. And so we got chefs that we knew and people that we knew to cook. And we had a pretty ragtag band of volunteers because nobody wanted to do it in 1984. It was a very scary time. And you know, the first dinner that we had, like 13 guys came, and then more came and more came. And I was running to restaurants and going, "Do you think you could donate a pie? Do you have anything you could donate?" You know, like I was just ragtag. I was just riding down the street going, "Can you help me? Do you have, do you got anything you could give me?" You know, and people were like, "Just take this and leave, please," you know. So it really started out very, very, nuts and bolts. And, but it grew so quickly, and the needs were so great because people were not just ill, they were starving. They couldn't work and they had no money, and SSI benefits were shit. If you could get them to a counselor, could get them SSI benefits. And so we quickly figured out how to manipulate city systems and city harvest and establish a free grocery store. And then, free clothing and all this other stuff because, life expectancy was 6 months. And people lost so much weight so quickly that they had nothing to wear on top of it. So we were just in the middle of responding to a crisis that was just absolutely mind-blowing and relentless. And we didn't have time to think about it much, but we did think about a president who wouldn't say the words. We thought about a city hall that was unresponsive. We understood how much we were up against, and it was, it was a fight. Every day was a fight, and it was just one that I couldn't turn away from. But I will tell you that after 5 years of doing that, and I was ready to leave. We had a lot of volunteers by then. We had an MFA running the thing. We had become a professionalized organization. And a bunch of guys from the theater district, one casting director, one agent, and another guy got together, and they were like, it's time for her to get out of there. She's skin and bones. She's been volunteering for all these years. We got to get her out of there. We're going to tell her she can act again. And so they get Louis D'Ambrosio, this crazy agent with the gold chains, and then he stops me on the street. He's like, I want you to come to the office. I think you should act again. And I was like, are you insane? I haven't done anything in years. And people were offering me, teaching jobs in MSW programs because nobody knew how to teach AIDS social service delivery. No one had any experience at the academic level. So people were saying, would you come and teach? So I figured, well, that was the route I was going to take. But these crazy guys, they got together, and I was like, that's insane, Luba, thank you. That's very sweet of you, but crazy. And a month later, as these guys had told him, you better get her in your office. So he's like, just begged me, please come up to the office. And all these people had been told to lie, that they would love to represent me, and they just couldn't wait. And I was like, that makes no sense. I don't know if you know anything about getting an agent when you're starting out. It's impossible. They don't want to see you. They don't want to talk to you. You cannot. Getting an agent is the hardest thing when you're starting. And here's these guys begging me, and I was like, so weird. I go, I don't even have a picture. And they go, we'll do your pictures. We'll pay for your pictures. We're going to do your resume. You'll be fine. So, okay. And then they sent me out on an audition, which was the casting director who was in on it, was running that audition, and he was like, you got the part. I was like, what? And it was like in Albany at the State Theater in the Mousetrap. And I was like, I got the part? What? And he's like, yes, you got the part. And I was like, okay, all right. And so I went and did that, and then I ended up screen testing for the movie Ironweed. Somehow they were shooting up there, and somehow they met me and asked me, and so then I got back to New York, and the biggest casting director in the city, who was casting Ironweed, called me and he goes, who the hell are you? What are you screen testing for my movie? Nobody ever heard of you. You never done anything. And I was like, I know. This what I've been. So I told her what I'd been doing, and these crazy agents. And so I spent like 4 hours in her office. She was sobbing, and she looked at me and she goes, "That's it. That's it. I'm getting you a movie." And she got me a very good role in a movie like 2 weeks later, and suddenly I was an actor, and it made it easier for me to move on, because I was the person everybody called. If your brother was in the hospital and they wouldn't take the food trays in, people somehow called me. Like, I was the person you called if you did not know what to do. And I started when I was 23, and I was 28 at that point. I had not been on a date. I had not done, anything. I went on one date, and the guy kissed me and then started crying because he certainly was going to die of AIDS. And I was like, I can't promise you that you won't, because I don't know where that's been, but not from me. Not kissing me is not going to kill you. Pretty sure. I might kill you with my bare hands. I was thinking that, but no. So it really helped me transition into the life that I was sort of meant to lead. But I never forgot, and I never stopped advocating, and I never, ever forgot that it really, really matters who's in office. If you think all politicians are alike, you're wrong. If you think that politics sucks and you don't want to participate, you're wrong. Participating is the only way. When I stood at the Clinton inauguration, which I fought like hell for him, I knocked on every door I could find. I stood there at the Arkansas Ball, and he talked about helping people with AIDS. And he talked about his wife, who was the better half of their marriage. He talked about things I'd been fighting for all my life, equalities I'd been working for all my life. It felt like it at that point. And I just stood there bawling in the Arkansas Ball, just bawling my eyes out, because the right guy was in office and things were going to change. And they did. And now there's a cure. So, so that's, I think, what I took away from it at the highest level of my life is it's always a fight. Yeah, this crazy bastard's in there now, so it's all right, let's fight. It matters, you know?
I think it brings us to our next couple of questions just about what is happening now, how can we fight? But before we go there, I'm curious, with everything you've shared, what kind of gave you the strength to continue? Especially when you mentioned you were in your 20s, doing this, getting calls about people dying, and doing this, like, I think that message of strength is just inspiring, first of all, with what's going through, and I'm just curious what kind of kept you going then.
I have been called. Sometimes the times you're living call you, and if you're listening and you answer, it will transform your life in ways you never thought possible. I never felt deprived or put upon or weary even. I cried a lot. Everyone that I worked with, every client and almost every volunteer died in that 5 years. That was a lot of funerals for a young girl to go to, for a young woman to speak at. But I felt so privileged to be there and to be able to help and to hold these lives in my hands and try to help. So it just felt like a privilege, you know. And then when it was time for me to go, that felt very real too.
It's very powerful. Moving to our next and our final set of questions, and we'll get into a Q&A.
I was going to say we're going to run out of
I
time.
think we'll be quick. The last two are.
I wanted to give them a chance to ask
Yeah.
questions if they want to.
Then the last questions just were, what do you see as the biggest threat to LGBTQ community now, and what can we do?
I'd be fast with that because following up what you're saying, I think the biggest threat to the community right now is the orange man in Washington and his cronies that are enabling him. Not just, and I don't think we can see our movement in a vacuum. They're like such a threat to everything that a progressive person believes in, like, you know, reproductive health, women's rights, like immigrants, like can't even go there about how they're treating immigrants. And like we all have to stick together. You know, we've all, like for me, like in all the movements I've been involved in, we always say that, but it's so much more important now, I think, because of what we're up against. I mean, this is really, this is like, we're living in a constitutional crisis. We're living in a serious threat to our democracy and to the rule of law that we all studied in law school. I mean, one of the things to me is we all need to get involved, because if we don't, we're not gonna have a profession. You know, there's gonna be no need for lawyers in this country. So I think the time is now. I'm gonna talk about this in my remarks too, but that to me is the biggest threat to us and to everybody.
Absolutely. Anything to add to that?
I would just say, go to church and tell the truth. Go to their city council meetings and tell the truth. Go wherever you can find a group of people who will listen to you and speak to them, you know? And yes, you don't have to get involved at every single level, but if there's a politician in your district that believes in you, that believes in your causes, that has your values, volunteer. Knock on doors. This is a moment when you can't even, your profession's not gonna be something you can hide behind. Nothing will save us but ourselves.
We now are at the Q&A, so if anyone has questions, please feel free to take the floor.
I'll start.
Yes.
Now that one feels somewhat powerless, what do you know now that you didn't know back then that you can pass on to someone like me?
What I know is that when people get together and they stand up for what's right, eventually they prevail.
Yeah, and I would say kind of the same thing. I think that we've learned that every vote matters. Like, we've had close elections. Like, we shouldn't let the other side talk us into that we have no power and we can't change things, because I think we can. Just now in Tennessee, not that many weeks ago, we had a congressional special election. It was actually my district. I had to vote for the good guy, the good girl. But we, in that district, which is, you know, Tennessee's a very red state, and that was a seat that had been held by a Republican, a red person, a Republican for a long time. And Afton Bain, the woman, very progressive, like, you know, she's almost like Mayor Mondale, like, those are her politics. We didn't win, but we made a 14% change in the vote, 14% up for Dems. And, you know, there's been national polls that said if people do 14% changes all over the country, how much, like, you know, like 20 seats can change. And
Yeah, that was a huge race. That was
Yeah.
really significant.
And we can, like, I've learned that over the years too. Like, don't ever say your vote doesn't count or your volunteering doesn't count, because each one of us does make a difference. It's not just a cliche. And, you know, in the AIDS epidemic, that was true. It's really true now. We have to stick together and we have to all get involved. Like, there's no excuses, you know, like, nobody should have an excuse. Like, we all gotta put on our boots and our working gloves and get to work. Like, that's just it.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, it doesn't mean you have to sacrifice your whole life or dedicate your whole life. You don't have to do what I did. It was an extraordinary moment that I was called to meet. But there is a moment that you are all being called to meet now. And you have to
Fight.
figure out how to take your talents and your empathies and your determination and how to apply those in the real world as often as you can.
Well, and our law licenses, I mean, I'm not sure about this, but we're all really privileged. And, you know, no matter how much money we have, we're really privileged. We have law licenses. We know the law. We have some power because of that. We have some prestige. People listen to us, and it's, I think, our obligation to speak up. It's no longer the time to say someone else will do that. We all need to step up, I think. It doesn't matter if you're a litigator. We can give money, we can volunteer. We don't all have to challenge, you know, these horrible laws, but we need to support the groups that do.
I had a friend in New York who couldn't bear the thought of what I was doing, and just really didn't want to talk about it. And over the years, she finally was like, oh, okay, I'm going to come down to the program. And you have to realize people were very ill that came. Through the hundreds, people came every Tuesday, and they were very ill, and they looked very ill. When she took one look around the room and then disappeared, and I couldn't find her. And I found her in the bathroom, sobbing uncontrollably in the stalls. And I said to her, this is not a good job for you. You can't do this job, but I need you to help me do this job. So I need you to go home, and I'm going to give you some stuff that you can do. I don't need you to be here. This is not a good job for you. These guys don't, they had tears of their own to shed. They didn't need to see hers. Okay, so I sent her packing, but she did. She gave money to the right places. She wrote letters to the right people. I helped her find a way to activate in a way that was right for her. So I'm not saying anybody should go out and try to be an activist in a way that makes you uncomfortable or that you don't feel you'll be good at, or that just makes you feel like I'm going to not be able to sleep any night if I'm that involved with that. Okay, don't then. But find a way to support the people who are, you know? So not everybody has to do, you know, there's different ways to be called, and it's good to measure your own temperature and your own abilities and apply yourself thusly, you know?
Definitely. We have time for, I think, a couple more questions if other folks have questions. Yeah, of course.
So I know Beth was probably in California during this update. Abby's shirt on the Interstate Sixth Circuit decision. What kind of helps you power through those setbacks to keep fighting for progress?
Alcohol.
100%.
Different CLE we might need.
I don't know, I mean, I feel like I'm kind of driven and I just knew what we were doing was right and, you cry sometimes and you feel bad, but I'm competitive, I don't want the other side to win, that's another thing, and they're wrong, so you gotta keep going and then, I have issues I keep losing on, in Tennessee, I'm mostly a family law attorney and I've tried for years, 4 times since 1999 to try to get de facto, non-bio parents recognized, and I have not been successful. It's the one big regret I have in my career so far. But, you just have to keep going. There's so much more to do. I don't want to let them, whoever them is, it's the red people. I don't want them to, I don't want them to win. I don't want them to make, affect me like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I was a big Howard Dean supporter. And one of the reasons I was a big Howard Dean supporter was because he was the first one to sign domestic partnerships into existence. And he had to wear a bulletproof vest in Vermont, okay? Like in Vermont for 2 years. The security threats were so enormous against him for signing domestic partnerships into law. So we don't have the luxury of being disappointed. The people who set the stage for this amazing transformation that we've made in America, for my sister and her wife to have a child, and for that to be a major celebration and their legal right as married people, we don't have the luxury of being disappointed. No. The people sacrifice so much to lay the groundwork for these laws, to lay the groundwork for these freedoms, that, yeah, you win some, you win some, you lose some, but you never stop fighting.
I think we have time for one last question, if someone has. If not, we have more time for pictures, which is fantastic. But thank you.
Well, hey, thank you guys for being here.
Right. I think we're gonna do pictures at the, I have a note, at the step and repeat.